You can start whenever you're ready.
Okay. Um, my name is Ain Eccles. I am an artist, um, multidisciplinary artist. I focus primarily though in painting, but I also incorporate photography, sculpture, printmaking, um, and just like mixed mediums into my practice. I'm also a teacher, a preschool teacher, I teach the babies, and an art teacher. Um, and I do, one-on-one individual classes, and I also teach large groups, also in the preschool that I work in. Right now, pandemic time, so it's Zoom.
Feel that.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. So we like to start our interviews with the first question. Are you hood grown? And if so, has that influenced your aesthetic?
Am I hood grown? Can you define that for me?
No, that's up to you to define. How would you embody that? Girl, I know your background. Like, I know all the places you've lived. So, like, this is really just a question of where you from and has the influence work you make.
Okay. And then, like, are you from the hood? Like,
nah, there's no definition of the hood. Hood is where your heart is. That's up to you.
Oh God. Okay. I guess you could say that. I mean, I grew up in a whole bunch of different places. So I've been moving around since I was 2 years old, and so I guess you could say that I kind of take everything from where I've lived, and that influences like how I move around in terms of like life in general, and how I also adapt to new places. So I lived in various different types of places. I've lived in southern, middle of nowhere country, and I've lived in cities. I've lived overseas. So just like all of those different experiences kind of help shape my view of people and the world, and it's more open-ended, I would say, than like a closed-minded type view. It just helps me to, or has helped me to, not see people as one way,
Right.
just be more empathic, and understanding different ways of life and different perspectives.
Yep. So you studied fine arts and psychology at the New School. We were both degree majors. So how does your psychology study impact your artistic practice?
So I guess I would have to refer more so back to during like my thesis, even though that was a few years ago, because that's when it influenced it the most. So a lot of my work was very research based, and a lot of times when I was thinking about what I wanted to do in terms of my thesis, in terms of my art practice in general, it would kind of stem from the things that I was learning in my psychology side. And the things that I was interested in, they kind of both influenced each other. So the things that I would choose to research were things that I was duly interested in exploring through my art practice. So I would say that my work is not just about how it looks, but more so about the context.
Right.
Yeah. So less about the medium also influences the context, but is influenced by the context, but it's still kind of, I think it's more about the context behind the work.
Right. And a lot of your concepts or have been like connected to or been honoring Black women. And it's been that way ever since I've known you, 7 or 8 years ago. So how do you continue to use the Black female form and have different concepts in your work?
Um, so I think that I'm gonna like refer back to thesis
Hmm.
just because it kind of contextualizes. So I think in that point in time, it was more like I was solidifying the things that I was interested in, the things that I wanted to talk about, the things that I wanted to explore. And obviously that also comes from personal experience. A lot of my work then talks about cultural displacement and um, racial kind of navigation and talking about um, like systemic racism and how that influences our psyches and how we kind of present ourselves to the world. And so, it was a more investigative and I don't want to say like I don't want to say negative. It wasn't negative, but it was just like talking about talking about oppression, but also talking about reclaiming our bodies.
Hmm.
That. So I would say fast forward to now is like it's still kind of a continuation of that, but kind of in a different way. Because I think that even then it was like an empowerment, showcasing like empowerment, the way that we reclaimed our bodies. But now it's kind of more so I don't know. I don't have like a specific focus as I did then. And I think that's kind
Hmm.
of where a big shift happened for me as I like moved into the working world. And, I had like less time to like really go in and do the research. So now it's more so about I feel like because I work with Black women, so I work with
Hmm.
like all my coworkers are Black women. So I'm around Black women, like not a whole bunch, but I'm around Black women, 8 hours a day for 5 days a week. So I think it's more so about seeing them and how they um, kind of express their womanhood, their Black womanhood, and how they kind of, and even with myself as well, um, how I kind of feed off of that and express and um, show my Black womanhood in different ways, other than just talking about, like purely talking about racial oppression and things like that.
Hmm. So, to talk a little bit more about that kind of empowering aspect that you were touching on. So, you've recently, or not so recently, but I've noticed a little bit more, you're working with like using selfies in your work, not just your own selfies, but other women's selfies. And selfies have gotten kind of, a bad rap of people thinking it's often like narcissistic women that are taking photos, but in other ways, it's a celebration of yourself for some people, and for um, it's like putting yourself out there where you might not usually do. How are you using the power of like the idea of the selfie in your actual art making?
Right. So specifically when talking about like the use of selfies, I use them in my bleach paintings, and
Mhm.
my bleach paintings are very I don't want to say loaded, but there's a lot of context behind them. So, using the bleach to talk about sorry, I just looked at one. Using the bleach to talk about um, whitewashing, not just, actually like physically changing your skin color through the skin bleaching, but
Mhm.
also talking about again that cultural displacement, that not knowing your history and like um, westernized dominance, even within Black culture, especially in American,
Mhm.
um, because of that displacement. and also talking about like internalized racism and colorism and things like that. So in the bleach paintings, I used selfies again as for to show like women reclaiming their image. I feel like selfies are when I think about it, I talk about the you talk about the male gaze. The traditional
Mm-hmm.
male gaze is how men are perceive women and showcase women in the art world in these paintings, traditional paintings, and these women are objectified, right? So in terms of like selfies, I feel like that is our modern way of the oppositional gaze, as
Mm-hmm.
Bell Hooks coined the term.
Mm-hmm.
She talks about it is basically almost a movement in women artists where they um, reclaimed their image, where they created and showcased, or I don't even want to say showcase because that sounds kind of um, exploitative,
Mm-hmm.
where women were in control of them and how they're perceived. Well, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily how they're perceived, but how they want themselves to be perceived.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't ever control how somebody's going to perceive you, but you can you can show the world in your own way yourself. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
It's kind of
No,
like,
I get you.
it's like making art. It's your
Mm-hmm.
vision. It's
Controlling the narrative to a degree, you
yeah,
know.
controlling the narrative to a degree of yourself and your image, and almost controlling that gaze or influencing that gaze instead
Mm-hmm.
of it. And also, it allows you to tell your own story
Mm-hmm.
rather than somebody telling your story for you.
Right. Dope.
Um, so yeah, so that's why I incorporate them, because it's again about that reclaiming.
Mm-hmm. So can we talk about your bleach painting process? Like honestly, I didn't even know about this until you started doing it. What was it, like our junior year of school? I feel like maybe sophomore. You started playing with bleach a lot.
I was doing bleach since I was in high school.
Well, like I didn't know. Well, you weren't doing it in foundation year, is what I'm saying. Gee, I just never seen it done. But what kind of paper are you using? How are you applying the bleach? How are you not dying from the fumes? How do you do that?
So that's hilarious. Um, so yeah, I've been doing it since I was like senior year in high school. My teacher kind of introduced it, but I didn't really use it um in my process until I really had time to do more research around how I wanted to use um, my materials to inform my context of what I was creating. So
Hmm.
with my process, usually I take like a Q-tip or like a very thin brush. I try not to use brushes because the bleach will break down the bristles and you'll
Oh.
come back with a nub
Hmm.
after a while if you use it too much. I usually have like little like caps full of
Hmm.
um, full bleach or diluted bleach, and I generally use construction paper, uh, usually black or different shades of browns, um, and yeah, I don't use. It's not like I use like a whole bunch of bleach at one time, so that's
Hmm.
why I don't die from the fumes. And half the time it's diluted, but yeah, it's very simple. It's a very simple process, and you're only for me. It's like you're the point of bleach is kind of to show like the highlights.
Hmm.
You show where the light hits rather than the shadows. So the paper becomes the shadow, and so it's almost like you're painting in reverse,
Opposite. Yeah. Cool.
inverse painting.
Hmm. I like it. So, can we talk about your relationship to the portrait? That's something that I've kind of known you as a portrait illustrator for quite a long time since, like I said, when we first were roommates together. I think that's when I saw your sketchbook and I was like, oh, she does portraits. Like, she's a beast. But how do you use portraits to examine more about the subjects beyond just their facial looks? What are you trying to say with portraits?
That's
Or
a
is it just a celebration of their looks and it can be just that?
um not to sound like a creep, but I am a people observer. So
We
what
all are. I think all artists are. It's not a tribute.
I be watching people. So I don't know. It's just like I have this thing where it's really weird where I could meet somebody, talk to them for like a day, but if I'm really it's also probably because I've gotten so good at it over time, but like if I'm, paying attention to like just them, just how they move and their mannerisms and stuff, like usually if they're like across the street, like across a big intersection,
Hmm.
I will be able to tell who they are just by how they're walking or just
Hmm.
how they stand. I wear glasses, so I can't really see. So usually they're blurry. I'm nearsighted, and usually they're blurry. So I think um, beyond, doing full body portraits, I think the nuances in a face are deeply personal because it's not just about physical attributes. It's about how you kind of it's about the little things like how your mouth sits,
Hmm.
how you like stare at somebody or how much you raise your eyebrows or something. Like it's something that really um is like deeply personal and can kind of like really identify a person and kind of like really, I don't know, like show who they are on a
Hmm.
level beyond you just speaking to them and getting to know them. Like you can tell a lot about a person by their mannerisms.
Right.
So so yeah, I think maybe that's why I'm so interested in faces. Also, I don't know, I just like faces. Like faces. There's so many different faces. When you really look at people, it's like there's so many different faces.
Hmm. And being in New York, man, there's so many of them there. I get that. So how has your affinity for material changed over the years? I would say, again, I'm gonna just keep referring to when we first met, but you were really working with pencil and paint, and you were very like much a two-dimensional artist, from what I understood.
Mm-hmm.
But now looking over your like body of work, you can see you played with so much materials. Um, like, how do you feel like that has changed, and how do you feel like your art is going in the future as you explore more materials?
Hmm. Um, well, I think that I was when you met me, I was very much so like dipping my toe in terms of like exploring different mediums. But a lot of my paintings at the time were already mixed media. So
Mm-hmm.
I was already interested in different materials. And I think through being in college, it just allowed me to explore that more in
Right.
different mediums. I think I was already interested in it. It was just I didn't have the resources to really fully engage with that. So,
Mm-hmm.
and in talking about that, I think that I just feel like there's more than one medium. There's more than one way and one medium to
Oh, for sure.
express what you're trying to, you know, get across in your work. So, and I think that's important, not to like pigeonhole yourself with one medium, um, just because your materials really influence um, how your work is understood and um, your process, even as you're thinking about what you're making while you're making it. I think that act of, that's also where I want to do art therapy, but the act of um, creating and using different materials and understanding different materials, I think that really influences the meaning of your work,
Mm-hmm.
and how you see your work and how you want to, you know, you want people to, as well as yourself, to understand what you're trying to convey.
Mm-hmm. So, a little less about art talk. A little kind of close to art talk, but how does living in New York affect your work? I feel like when I lived there, it did have an influence on my work. Um, but also, how are you doing during this quarantine being in New York, especially as a Black woman in New York? And on top of that, as an educator to Black and brown babies, like that are trying their best to get it to, do their best to survive this all.
Right. Well, first I want to say I miss my babies.
Mm-hmm.
I miss them so much. I miss them so much. I literally wake up every day. Especially in the beginning, I woke up every day, like for like the first like 2 weeks. It's like I miss my kids.
Mm-hmm. My students too. They're grown. They're all like 14 to 17, but I miss them like babies too.
Right. I don't even think it matters so much the age. Because mine, they're like 3 to 5.
Mm-hmm.
They're real babies. Um, so, living in New York is it is anxiety inducing. I would definitely say it. I feel like as I've, after graduating school, where, I while I was in school, it's not like, I was just in school. It's not, I also worked. I did internships and all that stuff. So it was not that I was never busy, but my primary focus was, on my work, whether it be the psychology side or the fine art side, which majority of the time it was the fine art side.
Right.
But so I was able to take that time and really like focus and um work on my practice.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now, you know, I I took this job in, with it in mind that I was doing it to gain experience in working with children, because I always knew that I wanted to go on to studying art therapy. And so I just wanted to gain, the experience in understanding how to manage multiple children, how to manage different age groups. Um,
I mean, we had our fun share at the community center when we used to work at the Witness Center.
Word. Word. By the way,
Wow.
my school is like down the block from there.
Oh, really? So you must see our wing kids.
Listen, I saw one of them the other day. He did not recognize me. I was like, first of all,
They never forget. They never remember us. The work of educators never really appreciated.
I didn't even say nothing to him, but I was like, and he looked so old. I was like,
Yeah.
you used to be shorter than me.
You used to be little. I remember.
Oh my God. So yeah, so it is very, just because like, in a city like this, networking is such a big thing, and
Mm-hmm.
titles are such a big thing. And, I have friends who are in the professional realm, in different types of professional realms, and also people's ideas about what it means to be an artist, especially people who are not artists. And it'd be the main ones who are not artists, who have so many ideas about, as an artist, what you should be doing, how you should be networking, you should be in these shows and
Mm-hmm.
blah 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 blah. If you're not, then you're not, then your art is just a hobby basically to them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not showing in a gallery, it doesn't matter if your work is good or not, you know whatever we consider good work, uh then your art is just a hobby. It's not, you're not taking it serious.
Right.
which is very frustrating.
It's like the most competitive city for visual art.
Listen,
Really.
it's very frustrating. And in the past 3 years, I kind of took a step back from creating. And I think also because I was really entering the working world full time, that I
Mhm.
just kind of focused on that for so long. Um, and within like the past year to a few months, I've really started to kind of make myself create again, whether I have um, an idea about a body of work or not, just to get in the habit of creating again and just to like work through the stuff that I'm dealing with, the stuff that I'm thinking about. Um,
Mhm.
so it's not easy because it's expensive here. So, you spend a lot of time. It's some of it is really about like surviving.
Mhm.
You don't always have the time to sit there and create because if like for me, I work with children 8 hours a day, 3 to 5 year olds, not just one or two,
Mhm.
like 12 of them.
Yeah, when you get home, it's not like, oh, I got all this
I
energy.
am tired. I
Right.
literally take naps on my lunch break.
Wow.
Yes. And my
Naps are always a thing for you.
my
I
my
know this. I came back to like people know our relationship. We lived together for 2 years. So it makes sense why I know all this about her. Okay.
um but even my director, like, she encourages it. She tells me
Mhm.
to take naps because she's like, I know this job is taxing. This is a lot
Mhm.
of work, working from 9 to 6 with 3 to 5 year olds all day that jump on you, that be sick, that be crying. They have like a whole bunch of emotions, that are hyperactive, that are always needing something, that always that want to give you a whole bunch of love, even though you can't take it right
Mhm.
at the moment. It's a lot. And it's also, there's a lot of rules with preschool, and you're also taking care of other people's children. So that is, you're always kind of on edge. You're on the go.
Mhm.
You're always like watching them, make sure they don't break a leg or something. So, it is a lot. But I would say that it was an experience, and I'm you know I'm a nomad, so it's about that time. I'm
Yeah.
ready to
Yeah,
move.
you've been here for quite a while.
It's been like almost 9 years, I think.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
Yeah. It's been a while.
It's been a long minute. And
So what's next for you in your work then? Where are you going? What's going on? What's next for you?
I am going to go back to school. I'm going to grad school,
Yay.
and I'm going to study art therapy. I'm going to go to Chicago. Um,
That was my number two school. I was so close to going there for undergrad. So
really?
yeah. So I'm very
Also my number
excited.
two school.
What?
That was also my number two school.
Oh well, we probably would end up together no matter what happened, girl.
Right, my number one school is Micah.
Yeah, my number three was Micah. So let's go. We would have been together. The world knew.
I was so in love with Micah. Oh my
Yeah,
god. Oh
but it
my
was in the middle of no. I mean, Baltimore is just not for me. But Delsina's there now. I just spoke to her a couple not too
really?
long ago. She's doing a master's program over there, so that's really exciting. She's doing curatorial studies.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
awesome.
I'm going to SAIC in Chicago. And yeah, we're gonna focus on this art therapy. We're gonna focus on, you know, helping these black and brown children.
Mhm.
That's my goal, because I feel like with arts therapies, creative therapies, I feel like that's the not the easiest lane, but the most familiar lane for
Mm.
black and brown children. You know,
Yeah.
therapy and psychotherapy and all those things. Mental health is already stigmatized in the Black community. So I want it to be a thing that is easier for them to adjust, and something that is familiar to them, so it doesn't feel like such a not just a culture shock, but so they don't feel scared.
Mm-hmm.
So they
I mean,
don't
something comfortable that you can hold on to.
right. So they don't feel like. So they don't. I don't want them to feel like. I don't want to say like something's wrong with them. There's nothing wrong. It's just
Mm-hmm.
like I want them to have methods of coping and methods of understanding their own mental health and navigating through their own mental health that are most familiar to them, that are better tools than just talking. Everybody can't talk about things.
Right.
So, just methods that are easier for them to kind of explore, like navigate and kind of understand and deal with their own mental health challenges.
We need that. We need you in the world. So I can't wait for your next chapter. And I'll visit you in Chicago.
Yes!
But where can the people find you? Not geographically, but on the interweb.
You can find me at aineccles.com. That's AINECCLES.com. And Ain Eccles on Instagram, AINECCLES. Yeah, and I'll be there.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Awesome.
You can email me if you have any questions, anything like that.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time and talking to me and being in this like interview state, even though we're friends.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.